Speaker recognizes Representative Proctor for a motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on Senate Bill 14.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, Senate Bill 14 contains two bills. The first one is House Bill 2512, which passed out of this chamber earlier this session, 97-23. What that bill does is in 2024, it requires that clerks add 4 hours on Saturday of early voting, the Saturday before an election. And in 2025, it ends the Monday early voting by noon and moves the deadline back to 7 p.m. on Sunday. This bill was drafted and constructed in coordination with the Clerks Association, because a lot of our rural clerks, especially those offices that are one or two man or woman bands, it's really tough for them to continue to do early voting up till noon, reset all the poll books and get all their polling places, often many, many miles away from the county seat, ready for Election Day. The other bill that's in this bill is House Bill 2513, which removes the 3-day grace period. I want to talk for a minute about why I brought this bill and why I'm before you today talking about it. So we passed a similar measure last year. It was vetoed by the governor and we didn't have the votes to override. And I was ready to just drop the issue and not bring it back. But in the fall, I went around to a bunch of election offices, including rural election office. And we had heard during the debate of the 3-day grace period that 0 ballots were being counted in rural counties after Election Day. And so I asked this clerk, so you didn't get any ballots? And she said, no, we got ballots. We couldn't count any of them because they weren't postmarked. The statute in Kansas says that if a ballot shows up after Election Day during that 3-day grace period and it's not postmarked, it can't be counted. And so we are disenfranchising hundreds, maybe thousands of rural voters. We won't know the exact number until the end of this election, 2024, because the Secretary of State's office is going to be collecting data on it. But we are disenfranchising voters who did everything right. They requested their ballot correctly, they filled out their ballot correctly, they put it in the mail and got it to their election office by 3 days after Election Day, but we can't count their ballot because the post office didn't postmark the ballot. If we do away with the 3-day grace period, then the ballot doesn't have to be postmarked because you know it was cast before 7 p.m. on election night. What this bill does, in addition, is it adds 2 days of early voting. So early voting will begin 22 days before the election rather than 20 days before the election. It adds 2 days for voters to mail-in ballots because now instead of the mail-in ballots going out at 20 days, the mail-in ballots will go out at 22 days. Another thing that it does is it moves the deadline to request a mail-in ballot back a week, because right now we let you continue to request a mail-in ballot until 6 days before the election. There's no way the election office is going to get your ballot, your ballot through the mail, and you're going to get it back by the deadline. So it moves that date back. The House Bill 2512, moving the Monday, includes the amendment that the minority leader brought during the debate to give election officers the leeway on a case-by-case basis to allow someone to vote on Monday if extenuating circumstances should occur. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I could not agree more with one thing that the previous speaker said, which is we should not be disenfranchising voters because the post office is failing to do its job and postmark ballots, which is why if we do away with the 3-day grace period, it won't matter if the ballot is postmarked, because unless they got in a time machine and mailed it back from the next Tuesday, that ballot was cast by 7 p.m. on Election Day. That's why we're here today. And we do have data. Last session, the Secretary of State told us that 0 ballots were counted in rural counties after Election Day in that 3-day grace period. So we know that, it is a small sample right now, but when the Secretary of State collects data for this election, which they've already asked the clerks to give them the data on, we are going to find out that we are disenfranchising hundreds, if not thousands, of rural voters and voters in urban districts as well, because not all of the ballots are getting postmarked. I'd like to answer a couple other concerns that I heard very quickly as I was talking to folks about this bill. The first concern I heard was, well, because you're moving the voter registration back 22 to 23 days before instead of 21 days, you're effectively, because that's a Sunday, moving it back to Friday. I've talked to the Secretary of State's office. If you register online by any means by that Sunday, your registration will be valid. If you mail in your registration and it has a postmark, and that postmark's before that Sunday, your registration will be valid. There is a federal law, the MVRA, which requires that if a election office receives a voter registration request that isn't postmarked, they have to accept it if it arrived within 10 days of the election. So this has no impact beyond the 2 days that we intended to move voter registration, because you have to have everybody registered before you start early voting. The second thing, the governor, when she vetoed this bill, a similar bill last year without those 2 extra days, said that she was doing it because military personnel were being disenfranchised. The UOCAVA, the federal law on overseas and uniform voting, requires that we get them their ballot 45 days before the election, and requires that their mail-in ballot be in by election night. So this bill has, just like the last bill, has 0 impact on military voters. And I'll wrap up by saying Kansas is lying to voters. Not intentionally, but we're lying to voters. When we tell voters that they can request their mail-in ballot 6 days before the election and they're going to get it in time and be able to get it back in time, that's a lie. That's not true. That is just not feasible with today's mail system. We are lying to voters, a lot of voters, when we tell them that if you get your ballot into the election office within 3 days after the election, we'll go ahead and count it. Because many of those ballots are coming in without postmarks, and we're not counting them. We're disenfranchising many more people, and the numbers will come back. When the numbers come back, I hope that the folks that were opposing this because they said I only had anecdotal evidence will be in support of this measure when we find out that we're disenfranchising hundreds or thousands of voters. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I move to adopt the conference committee report on Senate Bill 14.